My father died on a Thursday morning. By Saturday afternoon, the entire church believed I had come only because I wanted money. No one looked me in the eyes. Some looked away. Others whispered just loud enough for me to hear. She finally showed up. After everything she did. I can't believe she has the nerve. I didn't answer. For 5 years, I had learned that defending yourself against a lie people enjoy believing only gives the lie more life. So I walked quietly to the last pew, sat down, folded my hands, and waited for the service to begin. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. I'm a registered nurse in Asheville, North Carolina. And according to almost everyone who had known me growing up, I was the daughter who stole from her own father. The daughter who abandoned her family. The daughter who deserved to disappear. None of it was true. But truth has a strange habit. Sometimes it arrives years late. The funeral ended just after noon. People stood outside the church shaking hands, sharing memories, pretending grief made them kinder than they really were. I stayed near the steps, waiting for the crowd to thin. I had no intention of speaking. No intention of arguing. I only wanted to leave. Then someone called my name. Miss Carter? I turned around. A man in a gray suit was walking toward me carrying a leather briefcase. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. When he reached me, he extended his hand. My name is Daniel Brooks. I was your father's attorney. Attorney. That single word made my stomach tighten. I have something he instructed me to give you. He opened the briefcase. Pulled out a large cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front. Not typed. Written. In my father's handwriting. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over 5 years. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Daniel looked at me carefully. He made me promise this would only be delivered after the funeral. I stared at the envelope. What is it? I don't know. He sealed it himself. He only said one thing. I looked up. What? Daniel hesitated. He told me. If your daughter still comes, give this to her in front of everyone. My hand suddenly felt cold. People nearby had already noticed. Small conversation stopped. Head slowly turned. The envelope sat between us like it weighed 50 pounds. I reached for it. Before I could touch it, my older brother, Ryan, stepped between us. What is that? Daniel answered calmly. A personal letter. Ryan laughed. A letter? From Dad? To her? He looked around at the people gathering nearby. That's funny. He spent 5 years telling everyone he never wanted to see her again. A few people nodded. Someone whispered my name. Another person quietly folded their arms. Ryan looked back at me. You don't deserve whatever's inside. I still said nothing. Daniel didn't move. He simply held the envelope. It belongs to Miss Carter. Ryan took another step. You don't understand. My father hated lies. If she's getting something, it's because she manipulated him one last time. I finally spoke. No. My voice surprised even me. Quiet. Steady. I didn't ask for anything. Ryan smiled. You never had to ask. You always knew how to take. Those words landed exactly the way he'd intended. Several people looked at me differently. Like they'd just been reminded who I was supposed to be. Except They weren't remembering the truth. They were remembering a story. A story my father had spent years telling. And the worst part was that he'd told it so well. Even people I loved believed it. Daniel cleared his throat. Miss Carter. I am legally obligated to deliver this to you. He placed the envelope in my hands. It felt surprisingly light. Thin. Almost empty. Ryan folded his arms. Go ahead. Open it. The crowd became completely silent. For one impossible second. I almost did. Then something stopped me. Not fear. Not curiosity. Recognition. I knew my father. Whatever was inside. He wanted it read carefully. Not surrounded by whispers. Not with half the town trying to decide my expression before I'd even seen the first word. So I slipped the envelope into my purse. I'm leaving. Ryan laughed again. Running already? I looked directly at him. No. I'm finally done running. I turned around. Walked to my car. Closed the door. And for the first time in 5 years, I cried. Not because my father was gone. I'd already mourned him years earlier. I cried because deep inside, I somehow knew that everything I had sacrificed to keep one promise was about to come back into the light. But to understand why, you need to go back 5 years. Back before the rumors. Before the funeral. Before the silence. Back to the afternoon my father looked me in the eyes and asked me to become the villain of our family. That was the day my life disappeared. 5 years earlier. If you'd asked anyone in Asheville to describe my father, they would have smiled before answering. Generous. Reliable. A man who never let anyone down. They would have been right. At least partly. Because the hardest people to understand are rarely the ones who lie all the time. They're the ones who spend decades becoming exactly the person everyone expects. Before they finally ask someone to carry a lie for them. My father's name was Richard Carter. He'd owned a small construction company for almost 30 years. Nothing enormous. No private jets. No country clubs. Just enough success to earn respect. He built churches. Schools. Community centers. If you drove through Buncombe County, there was a good chance you'd pass one of his buildings without ever knowing his name. He liked it that way. He always told us that a good builder leaves his work behind instead of his signature. I believed that. For most of my life, I believed everything he told me. My mother died when I was 16. Breast cancer. Fast. Too fast for any of us to understand what was happening until she was already gone. After that, Dad changed. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Just enough that you noticed little things disappearing. He laughed less. Worked longer. Stopped taking Sundays off. He became the kind of man who always looked busy, even sitting still. Ryan reacted differently. My brother was 4 years older than me. Outgoing. Confident. The kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. Dad leaned on him more after Mom died. Business conversations. Financial decisions. Weekend projects. It made sense. Ryan wanted that life. I didn't. I wanted hospitals. Long shifts. Coffee that tasted terrible. Helping strangers on the worst day of their lives. By 24, I'd finished nursing school and accepted a position at Mission Hospital. The hours were brutal. 12-hour shifts often became 14. Some nights I drove home so exhausted I barely remembered the road. But I loved it. Not because every day was rewarding. It wasn't. Some days were heartbreaking. Some patients didn't make it. Some families stayed with me long after my shift ended. But every morning I knew exactly why I was getting out of bed. Dad never really understood that. "You could make twice as much working with us," he'd say. I'd smile. "I know. So why don't you?" "Because this is where I'm supposed to be." He'd nod. But I don't think he ever truly believed me. To him, success could be measured. Bigger contracts. Larger houses. Higher income. To me, success looked different. Sometimes it was watching someone leave the hospital after weeks of uncertainty. Sometimes it was simply holding an elderly patient's hand because no one else had come to visit. Money mattered. But it had never been the thing that kept me awake at night. Dad couldn't understand that. Ryan definitely couldn't. "You work too hard for too little," he told me once over dinner. "You save lives. So? You deserve more." "I already have enough." He laughed. "No one actually believes that." I did. And that difference between us seemed harmless back then. Just different personalities. Nothing more. Looking back now, I think it was the first crack. Around that time, Dad started complaining about being tired. Not ordinary tired. A deeper kind. He'd forget appointments. Lose weight. Sometimes he'd stare at paperwork for several minutes before realizing he hadn't read a single word. I begged him to see a doctor. He resisted for months. Finally, he agreed. The appointment lasted less than an hour. The waiting afterward lasted almost 3 weeks. Then one Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Emily." His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Can you come by after work?" "Of course. Don't tell Ryan yet." I remember those words because they felt strange. Dad never kept things from Ryan. Never. I drove straight there after my shift. He was sitting alone on the back porch. 2 untouched cups of coffee rested on the table between us. He looked older. Not by years. By something heavier. He handed me a folder without saying anything. Inside were scan results. Blood work. Specialist reports. I didn't need more than 30 seconds. Years in emergency care teach you how to recognize certain words immediately. Stage 4. Metastatic. Inoperable. The air around me seemed to disappear. "When?" I whispered. "They confirmed it yesterday." I looked back at the pages. Then at him. "Ryan knows?" He slowly shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because I needed to talk to you first." That surprised me. More than the diagnosis itself, somehow. Dad folded his hands together. "I've been thinking. I don't have much time." "Dad. Listen." His voice stayed calm. Too calm. "I need you to promise me something." I reached across the table and held his hand. "You don't have to think about promises tonight." "Yes. I do." The way he said it made me stop talking. He looked directly into my eyes. The same eyes that had taught me to ride a bicycle, to drive, to never leave a job unfinished. And then he asked me for something I never saw coming. Something that would cost me nearly every relationship I had. Something that would make my own family believe I had betrayed them. "Emily," he said quietly, "I need you to let everyone hate you." I stared at him, certain I had misunderstood. "What?" He took a slow breath. "Before I explain, you have to promise you'll hear all of it." I wish I could tell you I stood up. That I argued. That I walked away. But I didn't. Because when someone you love tells you they're dying, you listen. Even when the first sentence makes no sense. And what my father told me over the next hour changed the direction of my life forever. I remember every detail of that evening. The wind moved gently through the trees behind my father's house. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower hummed in the distance. Everything around us looked painfully ordinary. And yet, nothing about my life would ever be ordinary again. Dad stayed silent for almost a full minute before speaking. Then he reached into the folder again. This time, he removed several documents clipped neatly together. "I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "Bigger ones than either of you know." I looked at him. "What kind of mistakes?" "Financial ones." That surprised me. Dad had always been careful with money. He tracked every expense. Balanced every account. He hated debt. What happened? He rubbed his forehead. 3 years ago, one of my business partners convinced me to invest in a commercial development outside Charlotte. I trusted him. I shouldn't have. I listened without interrupting. The project collapsed. He disappeared. And I signed personal guarantees. I felt my stomach tighten. "How much?" He looked away. "Enough." That wasn't an answer. I asked again. "How much?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Almost $2 million. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. 2 million. My father didn't own that kind of money. His company certainly didn't. He nodded before I even asked. "I've spent the last 3 years keeping everything afloat. Loans. Refinancing. Selling equipment. I thought I could recover. I couldn't." The porch suddenly felt smaller. I looked at the papers again. Some carried bank logos. Others belonged to law firms. Several pages had large red stamps across the front. Final notice. Default. Demand for payment. Dad. When was Ryan going to find out? He closed his eyes. Soon. Too soon. I leaned back in my chair. "You should have told us." "I know." I was ashamed. That answer sounded painfully honest. For the first time that evening, I wasn't looking at the man who had always solved every problem. I was looking at a frightened father. A dying man. Someone who had spent years pretending everything was under control. Then he said something that confused me even more. "The company can survive." I frowned. "What?" "It can survive. There are buyers. There are investors. Ryan can still have a future." I didn't understand. "If that's true, why are you asking me to let people hate me?" He looked directly at me. "Because someone has to be blamed." I stared at him. "No. I won't do that." He nodded slowly, almost as though he'd expected my answer. I knew you'd say that. So let me finish. He stood carefully and walked inside the house. A minute later he returned carrying a small metal cash box. Old. Scratched. The kind people keep important papers inside. He placed it gently on the table. I've rewritten my will. I blinked. What? I haven't signed the final version yet. I wanted to explain it first. He unlocked the box. Inside were folders organized with colored tabs. Insurance. Property. Business. Savings. Everything perfectly arranged. Then he handed me one document. I looked down. My name appeared at the top. Almost everything had been left to me. The house. His savings. Several investment accounts. Even ownership of the company. I looked up immediately. This has to be wrong. It isn't. What about Ryan? He receives almost nothing. I pushed the papers back toward him. No. I'm not accepting this. You have to. No. He'll think I manipulated you. I know. He'll hate me. I know. The whole family will. I know. Each answer came quietly. Without hesitation. Finally. I asked the question that had been growing heavier inside me. Why? Dad looked toward the mountains beyond the backyard. When your mother was alive. She made me promise something. He smiled sadly. A promise I broke. What promise? She told me that one day. Our children would become two very different people. And that I had to love them equally. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't. I had never seen my father cry before. Not even at Mom's funeral. I gave Ryan everything he asked for. Every opportunity. Every second chance. I told myself it was because he wanted the business. But that wasn't the truth. What was? I was afraid he'd leave. The words hung between us. So. I held tighter. And without realizing it. I let go of you. I couldn't speak. He continued. You never asked me for money. You never asked for favors. You built your own life. So I convinced myself. You didn't need me. A tear rolled slowly down his face. I was wrong. I felt my own eyes burning. Dad. I'm sorry. So unbelievably sorry. The silence lasted a long time. Then he reached across the table. Emily. I can't fix the years I lost. But maybe. I can still protect one of my children. I frowned. What does that mean? He looked at the unsigned will. It means Ryan can never know why I made this decision. I felt a chill run through me. Because suddenly. I realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about something much bigger. Something he still hadn't told me. And when he finally did, I understood why he believed the entire family had to hate me. Dad stood up again. This time, he didn't walk toward the house. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked across the backyard. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear him. Ryan doesn't know the company is already gone. I frowned. What do you mean? He turned toward me. I don't own it anymore. I stared at him. That's impossible. I signed most of it away almost a year ago. The words landed like stones. But, everyone thinks it's still yours. They're supposed to. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Who owns it? He looked down. The bank owns part of it. Private investors own another part. And the rest. He stopped. Belongs to people I've never even met. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The business my father had spent 3 decades building was already slipping through his hands. Yet every morning he still drove to the office. Still wore the same boots. Still greeted his employees with a smile. No one knew. Not even Ryan. Why didn't you tell him? Dad gave a tired smile. Because Ryan still believes he has a future waiting for him there. He talks about expanding. Opening another location. Hiring more people. His smile disappeared. He's building dreams on a foundation that no longer exists. I looked at the paperwork again. So when you die, he'll find out. Yes. And he'll blame someone. Dad nodded. He'll blame whoever receives what's left. The answer came before I wanted it to. Me. You. I stood from my chair. No. I'm not doing this. I won't become the reason he loses his family. Dad remained calm. You won't be. He'll only believe you are. There is a difference. I shook my head. No. There isn't. He waited until I sat back down. Then he reached into the metal box one last time. This time, he removed an old photograph. It showed my mother. She was standing beside the unfinished frame of our first house. Young. Laughing. Holding a hammer twice the size of her hand. Dad smiled as he looked at it. Your mother always saw people clearly. I smiled through my tears. She did. Do you remember what she used to say? I nodded before he finished. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. He smiled. It's revealed when telling the truth costs you something. For a moment, it felt like she was sitting there with us. Dad carefully placed the photograph back inside the box. Emily. I've watched you your entire life. You've never chosen the easy road. You became a nurse. You stayed with your mother every night during chemotherapy. You worked double shifts to pay your student loans instead of asking me for help. His voice cracked. And now I'm asking you for something I have no right to ask. I reached across the table. What exactly are you asking me to do? He took a deep breath. When I die, I want everyone to believe you pressured me into changing my will. My chest tightened. No. I won't lie. You won't have to. You'll simply refuse to defend yourself. The sentence hit even harder. You want me to stay silent? Yes. For how long? I don't know. I stared at him. He didn't look away. If people ask, I want you to let them believe the worst. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because it sounded impossible. You know what that means? Yes. I'll lose Ryan. Probably. My uncles. Yes. My cousins. Most likely. Our friends. He nodded slowly. Almost all of them. I felt tears filling my eyes again. And what if I lose you before any of them ever learn the truth? Dad closed his eyes. Then I'll have asked too much. That answer broke something inside me. Because for the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to protect himself anymore. He had already accepted that his own reputation would survive. What terrified him was watching Ryan lose everything after he was gone. He believed that if Ryan blamed me, he wouldn't blame himself. He wouldn't spend years wondering why he'd ignored every warning sign inside the company. It was a father's final attempt to spare one child, even if it meant sacrificing the other. I hated the idea. Every part of me hated it. But when I looked at the man sitting across from me, I no longer saw the builder everyone admired. I saw a dying father trying desperately to arrange the pieces of a future he would never get to see. And then he asked me the one question I still hear in my dreams. Emily, will you carry this for me? Even if no one ever forgives you? I wish I could tell you I answered immediately. I didn't. Because sometimes the hardest promises are the ones made out of love. And I was about to make the hardest promise of my entire life. I didn't answer my father that night. Not right away. We sat on that porch until the sun disappeared behind the trees, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood finishing another ordinary day. Children laughed somewhere down the street. A dog barked twice before someone called it inside. The world kept moving, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Dad finally stood. You don't have to decide tonight. I looked at him. How much time do you have? He smiled sadly. The doctors stopped giving exact numbers. Months. Maybe a year. Maybe less. I drove home with my headlights cutting through the mountain roads, replaying every word he'd said. I barely slept. The next morning I worked a 12-hour shift in the emergency department. Broken bones. Chest pain. An elderly woman who reminded me of my mother. Normally, work cleared my mind. That day, it only made the decision harder. Every patient trusted me to tell them the truth. To explain what was happening. To help them face reality, even when it hurt. And yet my own father was asking me to build my future on silence. 3 days later, I went back to his house. He was watering the flowers Mom had planted years earlier. They're still blooming, I said. He smiled. Your mother always picked the stubborn ones. We laughed quietly. Then the laughter disappeared. I've made my decision, I told him. He didn't ask what it was. He already knew. I'll do it. His shoulders lowered just slightly. Not with relief. With heartbreak. I wish I didn't have to ask. I know. But I have one condition. He looked at me. When this is over, if there is ever a chance for the truth to come out, you don't stop it. He nodded immediately. I promise. That was the only promise I ever asked from him. Over the next several months, life became divided into two worlds. There was the world everyone could see. And the world only my father and I knew existed. Outwardly, nothing changed. I kept working at the hospital. Ryan kept talking about expanding the business. Dad kept smiling through family dinners, birthdays, and Sunday afternoons. Sometimes I caught him staring at us. Not speaking. Just watching. As though he were trying to memorize every face before he had to leave it behind. His health declined slowly at first. Then all at once, he grew thinner. His hands began to shake. Walking across the yard became difficult. Still, he refused to let most people see him struggling. Ryan believed the treatments were working. Dad encouraged that belief. I never corrected it. Keeping one secret eventually meant keeping dozens of smaller ones. I hated every single one. Then came Thanksgiving. Almost the entire family gathered at Ryan's house. It should have been a happy day. Instead, it became the beginning of everything falling apart. Dinner had barely ended when Dad stood and tapped his glass. "I have something important to tell everyone." The room became quiet. Ryan smiled. "I knew it. You're finally retiring." Dad shook his head. "No." He looked around the room. Then his eyes found mine. "I've updated my estate plan." I felt my heartbeat speed up. This was happening. Already. He continued calmly. "When the time comes, Emily will be responsible for handling everything." The room went silent. Ryan laughed. "What do you mean, everything?" "The estate. The house. The company." The smile disappeared from Ryan's face. "What are you talking about?" Dad answered without emotion. "It's my decision." One of my uncles frowned. "But Ryan works with you." Dad nodded. "I know. And I've made my choice." Every pair of eyes in the room slowly turned toward me. I wanted to speak. To explain. To stop it before it started. Instead, I remembered my promise. So I stayed quiet. Ryan stared at me. Then at Dad. Then back at me again. "How long has she known?" Dad answered before I could. "For a while." Ryan's face changed. Not to sadness. Not to confusion. To betrayal. He looked at me as though I'd become someone he no longer recognized. "You asked for this?" I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. That silence was all the answer he needed. He stood so quickly his chair fell backward. "I can't believe this." He looked directly at me. "You've been planning this behind my back." "No," I whispered. But it was barely audible. "What was that?" I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell him. So I lowered my eyes. Ryan laughed once. A short, bitter laugh. I should have seen it coming. He walked out without another word. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the windows. No one followed him. No one spoke. Every person in that room looked at me differently than they had an hour earlier. And I realized that my father's plan had officially begun. The lie wasn't spoken out loud. It didn't have to be. Sometimes, the things people assume are far more powerful than the things they're told. I drove home alone that night. Halfway there, my phone rang. It was Dad. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I pulled onto the side of the road. "So am I." Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said something I have never forgotten. "The first day is always the easiest." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Tomorrow, they'll start telling themselves a story. And every day after that, they'll believe it a little more." I didn't realize then how right he was. Within weeks, I would become the daughter everyone thought they had always known. And no amount of silence would stop that story from growing. My father lived another 7 months after Thanksgiving. Long enough to watch the story spread. Long enough to hear people repeat it as though they'd witnessed it themselves. At first, the rumors stayed inside the family. Then they reached the church. Then his employees. Then the grocery store. Eventually, They reached places where no one had ever met me. The story became simple. Simple stories are always easier to believe. Emily convinced her dying father to change his will. Ryan lost everything. The family fell apart. That was all people needed. No one asked questions. No one wanted to. The silence I had promised to keep became proof of my guilt. Every week made it worse. One afternoon I stopped at a local coffee shop after a night shift. The woman behind the counter had known me for years. She smiled politely. But it wasn't the same smile anymore. "How's your father?" she asked. "He's tired." "I'm sorry to hear that." There was a pause. Then she added quietly, "I hope everything works out between you and your brother." I nodded. "So do I." As I turned to leave, I heard another customer whisper, "That's her." I kept walking. By the time I reached my car, I realized something. People no longer saw Emily the nurse. Or Emily the daughter. They saw the version of me they'd been told about. And that version was becoming more real than the truth. Ryan stopped answering my calls completely. I still called every Sunday. Every single week. Not because I expected him to answer. Because I wanted him to know I never stopped trying. Sometimes the phone rang until voicemail. Sometimes he rejected the call after one ring. I always left the same message. "Hi, Ryan. It's me. I hope you're okay. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here." He never called back. Christmas came. For the first time in my life, I spent it alone. Dad was too weak to celebrate. Ryan refused to come if I was there. So I visited Dad early that morning. Then I drove home before anyone else arrived. He squeezed my hand before I left. "I'm sorry." Those two words had become his entire vocabulary. "I'm sorry." He said them every visit. Every goodbye. Every difficult silence. I always answered the same way. "I know." Late in February, the hospice nurse called. "You should come." I was already putting on my shoes before she finished speaking. Dad was awake when I arrived. Barely. The room was quiet except for the oxygen machine. He smiled when he saw me. "You came." "Of course." I sat beside the bed. For several minutes we didn't speak. There wasn't much left to say. Finally, he motioned toward the nightstand. Inside the drawer was another envelope. Smaller than the others. My name was written on it. "Not yet," he whispered. I picked it up. "What is this?" "A promise." I frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." His breathing grew slower. "I changed one thing." "What?" "You told me. If there was ever a chance, I shouldn't stop the truth." I nodded. "I remember." "I didn't." He smiled faintly. "I made sure of it." I wanted to ask more. But he was exhausted. Instead, he reached for my hand one final time. "Emily. I was proud of you. Long before this." Tears blurred my vision. "You should have told me." "I know. I should have." Those were the last complete words my father ever spoke to me. He passed away 3 days later. The funeral arrangements happened quickly. Ryan handled almost everything. No one asked for my opinion. No one expected one. When the will was read, exactly what Dad predicted happened. The room exploded. Ryan stood up so fast his chair crashed into the wall. You manipulated him. I know you did. I stayed silent. My aunt pointed at me. How could you do this to your own brother? Another relative shook his head. Your mother would be ashamed. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Still, I remembered my promise. I said nothing. The attorney read every page. No one listened anymore. They had already decided what kind of person I was. Ryan walked out before the meeting ended. The others followed. One by one. Without looking back. I was the last person left in the room. The attorney quietly gathered his papers. Then he looked at me. There is one more instruction. I looked up. What instruction? He opened his briefcase. Your father requested that a personal letter be delivered. After the funeral. My heart stopped. The envelope. The one from his bedside. The one I still hadn't opened. I suddenly understood. Whatever my father had written, he hadn't meant for me to read it alone. He had been planning one final act. One final chance. To tell the truth himself. And 2 days later, standing outside the church with my entire family watching, that moment finally arrived. 2 days after the funeral, my family gathered one last time. Not at my father's house. Not at the lawyer's office. At the small church where my parents had been married almost 40 years earlier. The attorney stood near the front, holding a single sealed envelope. Everyone looked exhausted. Grief has a way of making even anger look tired. Ryan didn't look at me. Not once. The attorney cleared his throat. Before Richard Carter passed away, he left one final written statement. He instructed me to read it aloud only after his funeral. The room became silent. He broke the seal. Then he began to read. If you are hearing this, then I have already left, and my children are standing in the same room carrying burdens I created. I felt my heart pounding. The decisions in my will were mine alone. Emily never asked me for $1. She argued against every change I made. Several heads slowly lifted. The attorney continued. She accepted only after I begged her to carry a weight that belonged to me. Ryan finally looked toward me. Confused. If you have blamed my daughter, you have blamed the wrong person. The room remained perfectly still. Everything she lost. She lost because she honored the last request of a dying father. I closed my eyes. For the first time in nearly a year, the truth was finally leaving someone else's mouth. Ryan. The attorney paused for only a moment before continuing. My son. If you are angry, be angry with me. Ryan's breathing became heavier. I loved you so much that I mistook protecting you for preparing you. I gave you opportunities when I should have given you responsibility. I believed I was helping. Instead, I made your sister carry consequences that belonged to me. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Emily wanted to tell you the truth the very first day. I was the one who stopped her. Ryan lowered his head. The attorney finished the final page. If there is forgiveness left inside this family, give it to each other. Not because anyone deserves it, but because life is shorter than pride. I have already wasted enough of mine. Signed, Richard Carter. The church stayed silent long after the reading ended. No one knew what to say. My aunt slowly sat back down. One of my cousins wiped tears from her face. Even the attorney quietly folded the papers without speaking. Ryan remained standing, looking at the floor. Finally, he walked toward me. Every step felt louder than the last. When he stopped, his eyes were red. "I never answered your calls." I shook my head. "I know. I listened to the voicemails." That surprised me. Every single one. His voice broke. I just couldn't believe any other story. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. "I'm sorry." I looked at him. "You don't have to apologize alone. I should have trusted you. And I should have fought harder to tell you." A tear rolled down his face. "You tried. I didn't let you." For the first time since we were children, my brother hugged me. Not because the past had disappeared. Not because every wound had healed. But because the truth had finally been given room to breathe. The months that followed weren't perfect. Healing almost never is. Ryan sold what remained of the company instead of trying to rebuild it. He admitted that Dad had hidden far more debt than either of us realized. Without the pressure of proving himself, he found work managing projects for another construction firm. He once told me something I'll never forget. "I spent years trying to become Dad. Now, I'm just trying to become myself." As for me, I stayed at the hospital. Exactly where I'd always wanted to be. People eventually learned the truth. Some apologized. Some never did. That was okay. Not every misunderstanding receives a perfect ending. But something else changed. Every Sunday morning, Ryan started bringing coffee before my shift. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Neither of us needed many words anymore. One spring afternoon, almost 2 years after Dad passed away, we visited Mom and Dad's graves together. Ryan placed fresh flowers beside Mom's stone. Then he looked at Dad's name for a long time. I finally understand what he was trying to do. I nodded slowly. So do I. He was wrong. Yes. But he loved us. I smiled through tears. He did. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Ryan stopped beside me. "You know something?" "What?" He laughed quietly. "I think Mom would have been angry at both of us." I couldn't help smiling. "Definitely. And then she would have made us eat dinner together until we stopped acting like idiots." We both laughed. For the first time in years. It felt natural. Sometimes people ask whether I regret keeping my father's secret. The truth is, I still don't have a perfect answer. I lost almost everyone I loved. For a while. But I also kept the promise that mattered most to a man who knew he was running out of time. Maybe life isn't about choosing between right and wrong. Maybe. Sometimes. It's about choosing which pain you're willing to carry. And learning to put it down. When the truth finally catches up. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Stories like this aren't really about wills. Or money. Or who inherited what. They're about the quiet decisions people make when no one is watching. The promises that are kept even when they cost more than anyone else will ever understand. Looking back now, I don't think my father wanted me to become the villain. I think he was simply a frightened man trying to protect both of his children the only way he knew how. He wasn't perfect. Neither was Ryan. Neither was I. But life rarely asks us to choose between perfect and terrible. Most of the time, it asks us to choose between two painful paths. And hope we're strong enough to live with whichever one we take. One thing this experience taught me is that silence has a price. Sometimes keeping a promise means carrying a burden no one else can see. And sometimes, telling the truth too early can hurt just as much as telling it too late. There isn't always an easy answer. Only the one you can live with when you look in the mirror. So let me ask you something. If you had been in my place, would you have kept your father's secret? Or would you have told your brother the truth the very first day? Even if it meant breaking the last promise your father ever asked you to make? Type secret in the comments if you believe I did the right thing by keeping my promise. Type truth if you believe my brother deserved to know everything immediately. Or type both if you think there was never going to be a perfect choice. I read as many comments as I can, and I'm always interested in seeing how differently people see the same story. And while you're there, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. If this story touched you in any way, please consider subscribing to Hidden Family Truth. Every subscription helps this channel continue sharing stories about family, trust, betrayal, forgiveness, and the quiet moments that shape our lives far more than we realize. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love. And remember, the strongest families aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones willing to tell the truth before it's too late.